Welcome to True Echo, where real struggles meet powerful redemption. In today's gripping story, a CEO goes undercover in his own company, only to stumble upon a moment that shatters everything he thought he knew. One young woman's quiet tears become the spark that ignites a sweeping transformation across an entire corporation. Stay until the end because what happens here might just change how you see leadership forever. Under the cold flicker of fluorescent lights, the polished floors of the Everyday Save supermarket gleamed like glass. It was just another Monday morning in Lincoln, a sleepy Texas town where people moved fast but noticed little. The sound of hurried footsteps filled the store as shoppers rushed to grab carts, check their phones, and beat the morning crowd. No one paid attention to the man pushing a worn-down floor scrubber in a janitor's uniform. He was just another blur in the background, forgettable, unseen. But this janitor wasn't who he appeared to be. Beneath the cap and faded uniform was Owen Grayson, CEO of the Everyday Save supermarket chain, an empire of more than 700 stores nationwide. With graying temples and sharp hazel eyes, he had built his name on relentless efficiency and innovation. But lately something had gnawed at him, a quiet fear that his empire was growing colder by the year. So he put on the uniform and slipped into anonymity, hoping to reconnect with the people who actually made the business run. He expected to find inefficiencies or hear minor gripes. Instead he found her. A muffled, trembling sob broke through the hum of the machine. He froze. Owen turned off the scrubber and moved silently, drawn toward the sound. Behind checkout lane 3, obscured by a tall candy rack, he saw a young woman hunched on a small stool, her head buried in her hands. She was talking into a phone, voice barely audible through choked sobs. "I've really tried, Auntie," she whispered. "If I miss one more shift, they'll cut my hours again. I still haven't paid the electric bill, and now it's the rent. I don't know what to do." Owen's heart sank. He took a step closer, careful not to make a sound. Her name tag, barely hanging on her worn uniform, read, Jasmine Brooks. "I haven't told anyone. What would be the point? They don't care. All they talk about is flexibility. But how is it flexible to be one bad day away from losing everything?" Jasmine let out a bitter laugh, one that didn't belong on someone so young. "And someone like the CEO. Yeah, right. You think someone like him cares about a poor black girl like me crying behind a register? I'm invisible to people like that." The words hit Owen like a gut punch. He stood frozen behind the shelf, unable to move, his throat tight. He had signed the flexible scheduling policy himself, after some slick consultants promised optimized labor costs and zero-friction operations. Now, standing in the shadows, he realized what that policy had actually become. A silent knife twisting into the backs of workers like Jasmine. Jasmine quickly wiped her tears, steeling herself with a breath as she adjusted her headset. Her body still trembled faintly, but her face was set in practiced composure. She rose from the stool, straightened her uniform, and walked back to the register like a soldier returning to duty. To every customer she greeted, she offered a smile. Not too bright, just enough to avoid questions. Owen stayed hidden behind the candy display for a moment longer, watching her reset herself like a machine. It was one of the most painful things he had ever witnessed, not the tears but the erasure of them. The performance. The necessity of pretending everything was fine. And worst of all, she was right. She had no idea that the man responsible for her pain was standing just feet away, dressed like a janitor and racked with guilt. A voice broke the trance. "Jasmine takes another day off and I'm cutting her hours to zero. I don't care what excuse she gives." The voice was low but cutting, delivered by a stern-looking woman speaking to a nearby assistant manager. Owen peered around the corner and instantly recognized her. Linda Martin, the store manager. Her face was pinched with disdain, her eyes tracking Jasmine like a hawk. Owen's jaw tightened. "She's unstable," Linda continued, unaware she was being overheard. "First her mother, now she's always sneaking off or emotional. I don't have time for that drama. This is a business, not a grief counseling center." The assistant nodded, expression unreadable. "I understand. Good. I want her phased out quietly. Cut her hours further. Let her make the choice herself. If she quits, it's easier on payroll." Owen's hands curled into fists. These weren't just callous orders, they were tactics. Policies he had approved had become weapons in the hands of people like Linda. This wasn't about cost efficiency. It was cruelty, automated and disguised as management. The janitor's uniform suddenly felt heavier on his shoulders, like the weight of every bad decision he'd made. He turned and walked away from the register, the silent scrubber left behind like a discarded illusion. His mind raced with memories. Years ago, in the early days of Everyday Save, Owen knew every employee by name. He'd worked night shifts when people called in sick. He'd handed out gas money to struggling single moms. He'd built his company on loyalty and trust, not data sheets and color-coded performance charts. But those memories felt like a different life. Somewhere along the line he had stopped seeing people, and had started seeing policies. And people like Jasmine were paying the price. That night, Owen didn't return to his penthouse suite or attend his usual investor dinner. Instead, he checked into a modest hotel off the interstate, his mind consumed by Jasmine's voice. He replayed her words over and over. I don't even know what I'm fighting for anymore. How had things gotten this bad? Owen flipped open his laptop and logged into the company's internal HR portal. With his executive credentials, he could access any employee file. It only took a few clicks to pull up Jasmine Brooks. What he saw made his stomach turn. Just 6 weeks ago she was scheduled for 32 hours a week. Then came the 2 days off for her mother's passing. The algorithm flagged her as low flexibility. Her schedule dropped. Week after week, hours were silently shaved. Now she was down to 9.5 hours. It was deliberate. A machine had judged her grief and sentenced her to poverty. No warning. No conversation. Just a quiet shove toward the exit. And it wasn't just Jasmine. He opened 10 more files. Then 20. A pattern emerged. Employees caring for sick parents. Parents with young children. Anyone with a reason to say no even once, punished. Their hours cut, their positions marked as unstable. And in store after store, the same language appeared in manager notes. Phase out. Low output. Let them quit. Owen's chest tightened. He thought of the polished headquarters where consultants like David Mitchell had pitched him those charts. Where they promised higher margins and zero-friction labor control. He remembered nodding along, thinking about quarterly profits and boardroom praise. Now he saw the cost. He shut the laptop, stared at the ceiling and whispered, "What have I done?" The next morning, still wearing his janitor's uniform, Owen returned to the store. Not to clean. Not to observe. But to face the quiet war his company had been waging against its own people. He hovered near the break room until he saw Jasmine slip in, clutching a cheap paper cup of coffee, her eyes rimmed red again. He waited a beat, then entered, mop in hand, pretending to tidy the counter. "Rough shift?" he asked gently. Jasmine looked up, startled. "Oh, yeah, just tired." She tried to smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "I've seen you around," Owen said. "Name's Jack." She nodded. "Jasmine." There was an awkward pause. She glanced down at her coffee. "It's just work stress. Nothing new." "You ever think about quitting?" he asked quietly. Her answer was immediate. "All the time." Then she laughed. But it was hollow. "But I can't. I don't have anywhere else to go. I just want to feel like I'm not drowning. Like maybe I matter. Just once." Owen looked at her, really looked. And for the first time in years he didn't see an employee. He saw a human being crying out from beneath the weight of a broken system. A system he built. That was the moment he knew. Everything had to change. Later that afternoon, Jasmine clocked back in for her final shift of the day. Her legs ached. Her fingers were stiff. And behind her polite hello, at the register was a tidal wave of panic she kept swallowing down. Rent was overdue. Power was cut off. Her phone had buzzed earlier with another warning from her landlord, 48 hours left. As she scanned cans of soup and boxes of cereal, her mind replayed the conversation from the break room. The janitor, Jack, had asked her something no one else had in months. "Do you ever feel like you matter here?" It lingered. Strange how someone in a faded uniform could speak with more compassion than anyone in management. At that moment, Linda Martin strutted past the register, pausing just long enough to throw Jasmine a tight, manufactured smile. "I expect you to cover a night shift tomorrow. If not, I'll assume you're not committed to this store." Jasmine's heart clenched. "But I already have a shift in the morning." Linda didn't stop walking. "Then make a choice. That's what flexibility means." The word tasted bitter. Flexibility. It sounded like freedom, but it was a leash. An invisible collar choking people until they either gave up their dignity, or got cut off entirely. Across the store, Owen watched everything. No longer just guilty, now enraged. This wasn't an oversight. This was a system running exactly as designed. And the face of that system was Linda Martin. That night, back at his hotel, Owen wrote. Not emails. Not speeches. But a letter. A formal revocation of the flexible scheduling policy. A complete overhaul of automated scheduling tools. The language was blunt and direct. Effective immediately, managers are prohibited from using scheduling algorithms to punish or phase out workers. All scheduling will now be based on human dialogue, compassion, and individual life context. Failure to comply will result in immediate review. But he wasn't done. He drafted a second memo to the board and executive team, a full audit of past scheduling practices store by store. Linda Martin's name was on the list, circled. Before sunrise he hit send. The following morning Owen didn't arrive dressed as a janitor. He arrived as himself. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb outside Everyday Save. Employees looked up, startled, as the automatic doors whooshed open and the CEO himself stepped inside, flanked by senior staff and cameras flashing from local press. Gasps rippled through the store. Jasmine looked up from her register and went pale. The man from the break room, Jack, was now wearing a designer suit and walking like he owned the place. Because he did. Owen turned and locked eyes with her. His gaze was warm, proud, steady. And in front of every employee he stepped into the middle of the store and raised his voice. I want every team member to gather here right now. What I have to say will change this company forever. Jasmine's knees nearly gave out. Coworkers murmured and drifted forward, curious, uncertain. Linda Martin appeared from the back, her lips pursed like a vice, heels clicking on the tile. The crowd formed a half circle around Owen. He nodded to Jasmine. You, he said softly. Please stay. This starts with you. A stunned hush fell. Jasmine stared at him. What? He smiled gently. You helped me hear something no CEO ever wants to hear. And because of that, we're going to fix this, starting now. Owen turned to the rest of the employees. His voice rose. I want to begin by saying something rare in corporate America. I was wrong. The room froze. I approved a policy meant to make our stores more efficient. But in practice, it has become a weapon. One that punishes compassion, penalizes grief, and pushes good people like Jasmine to the brink. He paused, took a breath, then turned slowly toward Linda Martin. And it stops today. Linda's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Owen continued. The flexible scheduling policy is revoked as of this moment. All scheduling will now be done through conversation, not automation. Managers who treat employees as disposable will be held accountable. And no one will be made invisible again in this company. Gasp. A single clap. Then another. Soon the room was echoing with applause. Some employees moved to tears. But Owen wasn't finished. He turned back to Jasmine, his voice lower now but no less powerful. You said you just wanted to be seen. She nodded slowly, trembling. Well, Jasmine Brooks, I see you. We all see you. And from today forward, your voice will help lead us into something better. Jasmine's lips quivered, unable to form words. Tears streamed down her face, only this time they weren't tears of shame or fear. They were tears of liberation. The applause still echoed through the aisles, but Jasmine barely heard it. She stood frozen, her heart racing, eyes wide with disbelief. Just yesterday she'd cried behind the shelves, thinking no one would ever notice her pain. And now, the most powerful man in the company was speaking directly to her, defending her, changing everything because of her. Owen placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and leaned in just slightly. Thank you, Jasmine, he said quietly. You helped me remember who I used to be, and who I need to become again. The employees crowded closer, whispering in awe. Some knew Jasmine's story. Others had lived their own version of it. All of them were feeling the same thing now, a sense that maybe, just maybe, the system was about to shift in their favor. Linda Martin, however, stood rigid and silent, her expression unreadable. The regional manager, Jeffrey Collins, stood nearby, pale and tight-lipped. He tried to speak, clearing his throat awkwardly. Mr. Grayson, he began, I must caution that removing the scheduling policy could severely disrupt store operations. The data shows. Owen cut him off, his voice firm. The data shows results. But it doesn't show suffering. It doesn't show tears. And it certainly doesn't show the moment a human being loses faith in the place they give their loyalty to. Jeffrey fell quiet, retreating a step into the crowd. Owen turned again to the staff. We will replace the policy with something better, something human. And I've already appointed a team to lead that initiative. But more importantly, I'm putting someone at the head of that team who knows firsthand what this company needs. He turned to Jasmine once more. Jasmine Brooks, I'd like you to lead our new internal program called Voice First. It's a team of employees from all levels who will review policies and give feedback directly to me and the board. If we're going to build a workplace for people, it has to be led by people who were once silenced. Gasps erupted. Jasmine's hands flew to her mouth. What? Me? You? Owen confirmed. Because you have the most important quality any leader can have, empathy forged by experience. Her lips trembled. I'm just a cashier. No, Owen said with conviction. You're the reason this company still has a soul. Applause exploded once again, louder and more passionate this time. Jasmine's co-workers surrounded her, many reaching out to squeeze her hands or pull her into hugs. Even those who had silently watched her struggles stepped forward now, proud to see someone like them stand tall. For Linda Martin it was a reckoning. She stood off to the side, expression slowly collapsing under the weight of what she'd done, and the very public shift that was happening without her control. It was clear the old way of managing, by fear and pressure, was dying right there in front of her. That evening, Owen returned to corporate headquarters. He stepped into his expansive office, a space that once symbolized success, but now reminded him of disconnection. He sat at his desk, powered up his laptop, and wrote the most important internal memo of his career. The subject line was simple. A company for people, beginning today. He addressed it to every manager, assistant, executive and hourly employee across all 700+ stores. Today I witnessed something that changed me. I heard the tears of an employee who thought she was invisible. Her pain was real. And it came from policies I signed with good intentions, but with no understanding of the harm they would cause. We cannot call ourselves successful if our people suffer quietly in the margins of our spreadsheets. We cannot boast profit if it comes from the despair of those we count on to serve our customers every day. He outlined the immediate removal of the flexible scheduling system. He detailed the Voice First initiative and Jasmine's new leadership role. He ended the message with words that came not from a CEO, but from a man who had remembered his purpose. We must return to the foundation this company was built on: respect, compassion, and human dignity. We cannot undo the past, but we can control what comes next. And from this moment forward, Everyday Save will never again forget the people who make our business possible. We are not a company of machines. We are a company of hearts. He hit send. And then, for the first time in years, Owen leaned back in his chair, not burdened by guilt but buoyed by resolve. Back at the Lincoln store, Jasmine stayed long after her shift ended. She stood at the front doors with a small engraved plaque Owen had handed her before leaving. On it, in bold, elegant letters, were the words, "This is a workplace for people. Every voice matters." She knelt down and placed it gently by the door, where every employee and customer would see it. Her fingers lingered on the inscription, her eyes wet with emotion. For the first time in years, Jasmine felt not like a shadow, but like a light. The plaque at the entrance of Everyday Save's Lincoln store didn't just mark a policy change, it marked the beginning of a movement. Jasmine arrived the next morning to find coworkers already gathered around it, reading the words aloud, some even taking photos to share online. This feels different," one cashier whispered. "Like we actually matter." For Jasmine, everything still felt surreal. Less than a week ago, she'd sat alone behind lane 3, crying into a phone, convinced she was disposable. Now, coworkers were congratulating her, patting her back, calling her Miss Brooks with smiles that felt genuine. Customers recognized her from local news stories about the CEO's visit and gave her knowing nods as they checked out. But Jasmine didn't let the praise cloud her mission. She reported promptly to the back office, where a small meeting room had been reserved for the first Voice First session. Owen wasn't physically present that day, but his spirit filled the space. A printed note from him was posted on the whiteboard. "This team doesn't answer to the board. It leads the board. You're here to speak for every worker who's ever felt unheard." As employees from various departments trickled in, an older bakery worker, a night stalker, a single mom from the deli, Jasmine welcomed each of them with warmth and clarity. "This is a safe room," she said, "and every story matters. We're not just reviewing policy. We're rebuilding trust." They began with open stories. One by one, employees shared tales they had hidden for too long. Carlos, the janitor, who once slept in the break room for 2 nights because he couldn't afford gas back home. Amaya, the bakery clerk, who had to bring her child to work in the stockroom during a scheduling mix-up, then was punished with reduced hours. Marcus, a security guard who worked through a kidney infection because he feared being labeled unreliable by the system. Jasmine listened, wrote every detail down, and didn't let a single word go unheard. By the end of the meeting, the entire room was changed. Tears had been shed, but also something new had bloomed: hope. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, Owen faced a different storm. The executive team had read his email, and not all were thrilled. In a tense boardroom lined with suits and steely eyes, David Mitchell, the same consultant who had once sold Owen on the flexible scheduling system, stood in front of a massive graph showing profits. "You're making a mistake," he warned. "We've seen a 19% cost reduction across stores due to that policy. If you walk this back, the stock will suffer. Shareholders won't tolerate that kind of sentimentality." Owen stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back. He turned slowly, his voice calm but commanding. "I'd rather take a short-term stock dip than build a company that feeds on human suffering." David blinked. "Sir, with all due respect." "No," Owen said sharply. "With respect, David, because I still respect your talent, I signed off on a system that hurt my people. You showed me numbers. Jasmine Brooks showed me truth. I'll take truth over numbers from now on." Silence fell over the room. For the first time in years, Owen wasn't speaking as the CEO who founded a grocery empire. He was speaking as the young man who once stocked shelves in Dayton, Ohio, and knew every employee by name. The tide had shifted. Back at the Lincoln store, Jasmine was in motion. She submitted her first voice-first report to corporate, recommending 1. A humane scheduling policy that included grace periods for emergencies. 2. A life check survey conducted monthly by store managers to understand personal challenges. 3. Guaranteed base hours for loyal employees so they would never fall below a livable minimum. 2 days later, she received a personal reply from Owen. "These policies are gold. Send them company-wide. Full rollout authorized." And Jasmine, "Thank you. Keep leading." The message stunned her. Not just because of the authority she'd been given, but because someone in power was actually listening. In the following weeks, everyday Save stores across the country began shifting. Reports came in from Chicago, Atlanta, Bakersfield, and Miami. Happier staff, stronger retention, even increased customer satisfaction. News outlets started picking up the story. Supermarket CEO admits mistake, follows employees' lead. Some called it revolutionary. Others called it naive. But one thing was certain: everywhere voice first touched, the culture changed. Employees weren't just cogs anymore. They were people. And as the movement grew, so did Jasmine's strength. She no longer doubted her worth. She walked through the store not as a weary, broken cashier, but as someone whose voice had echoed up to the highest office and transformed the hearts of an entire company. The days that followed were unlike anything Jasmine had ever experienced. Customers now lingered just to say hello. Co-workers she'd barely known before were suddenly seeking her out, offering suggestions, telling their stories, and even asking if she'd speak to their cousin who worked at a different store across town. Her face had appeared in an article in the Fort Worth Herald under the headline, "From Checkout Lane to Corporate Change, Jasmine Brooks Inspires Supermarket Overhaul." She kept the clipping folded in her pocket, not out of pride but as a reminder of where she came from. Because behind the growing attention was still the same young woman who, not long ago, sat hunched behind lane 3, whispering to her aunt on the phone, wondering if she mattered. Now people saw her. One day while she was reviewing voice-first forms in the break room, Linda Martin entered. The room fell quiet. Linda stood awkwardly, holding a folder, her expression unreadable. Jasmine, unsure what to expect, nodded politely. "Hi, Ms. Martin." Linda's voice was soft, almost unfamiliar. "May I sit?" Jasmine blinked. "Of course." Linda settled across from her, and for a moment she just sat there, staring at her hands. Then she spoke. "I've been managing for over 20 years. I was trained to value rules, numbers, results. I thought that made me strong. But watching what happened these last few weeks, watching you," her voice cracked slightly, "made me realize I wasn't strong. I was afraid. Afraid to care too much. Afraid to look weak if I bent the rules for people." Jasmine listened in silence. Linda continued, eyes glistening. "I was wrong. And I'm sorry for how I treated you. Truly." The apology caught Jasmine off guard. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't corporate. It was real. She could have responded with bitterness, with a lecture. But instead, Jasmine nodded gently and said, "Thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot." They sat quietly together for a while, two women who had once been on opposite ends of a cruel policy, now sharing the same space of healing. From that day on, Linda changed. She began attending voice-first meetings not to dominate them but to learn. She met with employees individually. She even volunteered to mentor a single mother on the bakery team struggling with childcare. People noticed. And if Linda, one of the most rigid managers in the company, could change, so could others. At corporate headquarters, Owen stood before a new group of regional leaders. Behind him, a giant screen displayed a single phrase in bold. The era of quiet suffering is over. This is not just a branding shift, Owen told them. This is a moral one. He spoke about Jasmine. About the night he heard her sobbing behind the candy shelf. About the system he had built without realizing it crushed the very people it claimed to empower. And then he announced a new initiative. A compassion audit. Every store would be visited. Not by regional reps, but by listening teams. Teams trained to hear, not just assess. Their goal was simple: identify invisible pain, surface buried stories, and report directly to voice first. Managers who failed to adapt would be retrained, or replaced. For some, this news was alarming. But for many, especially store-level leaders who had quietly resisted the old system, it was a breakthrough. Jasmine, who had been invited to the meeting virtually, appeared on the screen beside Owen. "I'm not a miracle worker," she told them. "I'm just someone who got tired of pretending I was okay. There are thousands more like me. Your job now is to find them before their tears fall unheard." A few leaders in the room bowed their heads. Others applauded. Owen simply smiled. Back in Lincoln, something new appeared in the break room, a chalkboard titled "Your Voice Matters." Employees were encouraged to write messages, wishes, frustrations, or ideas. No names required. By the end of the week it was full. "Thank you for the courage, Jasmine. I finally told my manager my wife's sick. She actually listened. I didn't think anyone cared before. Now I do." Jasmine stood in front of it, reading each one slowly. Her heart swelled, not with pride but with purpose. These weren't just scribbles. They were proof that a culture had shifted from fear to hope. She added her own message at the bottom. "We see you. Keep speaking." And across the store, employees kept doing just that. Weeks later, the Lincoln store didn't just feel different, it was different. Smiles came easier. Shift trades were handled with grace, not punishment. Managers checked in on sick employees, not with suspicion but with concern. And turnover? It had dropped to the lowest point in company history. One Thursday morning, Jasmine arrived early to set up for another voice-first meeting. She was placing new feedback forms on the table when a familiar voice echoed from behind her. "You're really running the show now, huh?" She turned and smiled. Owen Grayson stood in the doorway, dressed in casual slacks and a rolled-up button-down. No entourage. No corporate badge. Just him. "I thought CEOs were too busy for surprise visits," Jasmine teased. He walked in, shaking his head. "Not anymore. I realized something. When the most powerful person in the company doesn't know the first names of the people holding it up, he's not powerful. He's lost." Jasmine grinned. "Want to see what we're working on next?" He nodded eagerly and sat down as she walked him through new proposals, like emergency hour guarantees, flexible childcare support, and mental health leave pilots. Owen was silent for a moment, deeply moved. "I used to measure success in margins," he finally said. "Now I measure it in moments like this." She looked at him, this man who had once been the cause of her greatest fear, and now her fiercest ally. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't listened," she said. "If you hadn't cared." "No," Owen replied softly. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't had the courage to cry where someone could hear." There was a pause. Then Owen stood and reached into his coat. He pulled out a small, newly engraved plaque and handed it to her. "To Jasmine Brooks, in recognition of the voice that changed everything. You reminded us who we are. And who we must always be." Tears welled in her eyes. "I want this one at headquarters," he added. "Right in the executive lobby. So no leader ever forgets the cost of silence." Jasmine nodded, blinking away the tears. "I'll bring it there myself," she said. That afternoon, Jasmine walked the aisles like always, but customers and co-workers looked at her differently. Not just with respect but with warmth, trust, gratitude. At checkout lane 3, the place where it all started, she paused. A new cashier stood there, young and nervous. Jasmine stepped closer and smiled. "First week." "Yeah," the girl said. "Kinda scary." "Don't worry," Jasmine replied. "This is a good place. And if anything ever feels wrong, you come find me. We've got your back." The girl nodded, relief washing over her face. And in that moment, Jasmine saw it clearly. The cycle of invisibility had been broken. Not with power, but with empathy. In the world of business, policies can become weapons and people can become data. But this story reminds us, no spreadsheet can measure a broken heart, and no algorithm can see silent tears. Jasmine Brooks' courage didn't just change her fate. It changed a company. And it changed a man who rediscovered his soul the moment he chose to listen. As Owen Grayson said, leadership is not about being first in command. It's about being first to care. So ask yourself, have you ever felt invisible at work? Have you cried in silence, believing no one would hear? You're not alone. And it's time for that to change. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to True Echo for more powerful human stories that remind us what truly matters. Leave a comment below, share your story. Because someone, somewhere, needs to hear your voice. And together we can make sure that no one is invisible ever again.